Hey Red, we've got some more cards to review for the up and coming Kobolds and Catacombs expansion for Hearthstone. So, a new one they've introduced is really a rework of an older card. 4 mana, 5/6 common card. Hoarding Dragon, Death-Rattle, give your opponent 2 coins. Now, basically, this card is a Hungry Dragon except playable. If you recall, Hungry Dragon used to summon a 1-cost minion for your opponent, and the problem with this card is that there's a lot of good 1-cost minions that you do not really want your opponent to get. Since this is a Death-Rattle, what it does is A, you can't purposefully mill your opponent with it, so it removes that mechanic from it, and B, your opponent has to actually kill it first before they get any sort of benefit from this card, which means that I would run this in absolutely every deck if it were up to me. I suppose it can work against you if your opponent has good removal. The real scenario where this works against you is against Druid and Rogue, where they can make a lot of use of those 2 coins, but those decks don't always have good removal on 4 mana, which means you can probably keep this up for a significant amount of time. By the time they get to use the coins, you're probably not in that much danger. And they're certainly not going to design decks around it, unless, again, it's in every deck. So, with that being the case, I would run this in every deck, which is going to result in people playing around it and expecting 2 coins, in which case the meta would shift again when people stop running it, and so on and so forth. Next is the Silver Vanguard, a 7 mana, recruit an 8 cost minion. Recruit takes a minion from your deck, and this is a Death-Rattle, so it doesn't happen instantly, otherwise that'd be a little bit broken. And it's a 3/3. Obviously the card itself for the stats is absolutely awful, but the main thing this card does is it punishes board clear. So you get rid of your opponent's board, but you didn't silence this. Well, now you have an 8 mana minion to deal with instead of a 3/3. Regardless, if you're going to play a 7 mana minion, there's a lot better ones. I don't really see this getting that much play. I don't know, if you really want to spend 7 mana on getting an 8 cost mana minion in your hand, you might as well just have card draw. It doesn't really make sense to spend 7 mana to drop a 3/3 on the board that doesn't do anything when you drop it. This is a pretty bad card as far as I'm concerned. 3 mana, Lone Champion. 2/4 stats, Battlecry. If you control no other minions, gain Taunt and Divine Shield. This is a very good card because a lot of time on turn 3 you're not going to be having other minions if you're playing a control deck, which this seems like it would work in a control deck, which means you're likely to get that Taunt and Divine Shield. Just one of those stats would make this a playable card. Both of them makes this a very annoying card to deal with, to where even if you draw it late game, if you're top decking, this is still a good card because Divine Shield taunts are not easy to deal with unless you happen to have a silence. This will see play in the more control decks. Beyond that, it's not very good, but at least personally I would run at least one of them in any sort of Paladin Divine Shield deck, possibly two. This would work best with Paladins. I don't know why it's a neutral card because I don't really see it getting used outside of Paladin decks. 6 mana, Hungry Eden. 4/10 stats, Taunt, Battlecry, summon a random 2-cost minion for your opponent. This is like the Hungry Dragon, except now it costs 6 mana, has different stats, and it's got a Taunt. There's actually a lot more 1 mana minions that I don't like as compared to 2 mana minions that I don't like. Because a lot of 2 mana minions will be 1/1s or super weak stats, and then there's 1 mana minions that are weak if they have a battle cry, but they're not weak if they don't have a battle cry. If you really need a taunt, this is very much playable. If you're playing some sort of a taunt deck that gets bonuses off playing taunts, this is a good card, I think, because a 2 mana minion is not going to be able to deal with this. Basically, if you're playing a rushy deck, you don't want to use this, but otherwise, this is a very much playable card. Druid taunt decks might get some use out of it, and obviously warrior taunt decks are going to get a lot of use out of it. Beyond that, I don't really see why anybody else would play a card like this because it's not very powerful. It's just annoying is all it is. Epic 5 mana Arcane Tyrant. 4/4 elemental, cost 0 if you've cast a spell that costs 5 or more this turn. So this is easily a 0 mana card basically every single time you play it. With that being the case, if you have a lot of spells that cost 5 or more, you should run this in every single deck that you have those types of spells. For example, I would run this in probably every single mage deck just because it's a 0 mana 4/4. And you get to cast a spell that costs 5 or more, which means it already makes up its stats. And it's an elemental, so there are also a lot of elemental mage decks running around. And if you run this with Lich King Jaina, or a Dread Knight, or whatever it is, then it also gets the elemental lifesteal if you happen to have that on the board. And it costs 0 mana. So this is a very good card. I would run 2 of them in every single elemental deck slash spell deck. 6 mana, Spiteful Summer, 4/4 stats, Battlecry, reveal a spell from your deck, summon a random minion with the same cost. I wonder what that means, reveal a spell. Does your opponent get to see that spell, or do you simply see it? It's not Discover, it's not a Recruit, so you don't get to choose. It seems to be a random effect. Summon a random minion with that same cost. If you run this alongside an Arcane Tyrant deck, where you have a bunch of spells that cost 5 or more, and you summon this, so 4/4 stats, that costs around 3 or 4 mana, depending on what type of card you're playing. Now we need to make up an extra 3 mana, so if you get even a spell that costs 3 mana or more, this card is already worth it. If you get a spell that costs 4 mana or more, you're very likely coming out ahead. With that being the case, if you create the right deck, this is a very good card. Because with spell decks, you're oftentimes going to be using your spells to win the game, and if you having spells also results in you summoning powerful minions, that's amazingly good. So I would run 2 of these in any sort of spell deck. Well, not any sort of spell deck. Any sort of spell deck with a lot of spells that cost 3 or more mana. Obviously, you don't want to run this if you have a bunch of counterfeit coins in your deck or things of that nature, or preparations. You wouldn't really want to run this as part of a Miracle Road deck. But beyond that, it's a pretty good card, I think. 8 mana, Grand Archivist. 4/7 stats, which are terrible for 8 mana. At the end of your turn, cast a spell from your deck, targets chosen randomly. I'm pretty sure this is the most insane card they've ever released. This is like a controllable Yogg-Saron that occurs at the end of every turn. And you can summon 2 of them. You can have 2 of them on the board. If you really want, you can Faceless Manipulator this so that you can cast 3 spells from your deck. And you can manipulate what spells are cast based on, so you can make it so that they never target you by not having targeted spells. For example, Arcane Missile will never target you. That will always hit your opponent. If you have 3 of these on the board, you fire off 3 Arcane Missiles. You can also do this with things like Secrets. There's all sorts of combos you can use with this card. The stats are not very good, but if you make a spell deck with the combination of these 3 cards, then you can absolutely snowball through your opponents so long as you design it properly. I wouldn't really recommend using this with things like Pyroblast because you could easily just kill yourself. But I don't know, if you want to chance it, go ahead, have fun. And now the legendary cards. 8 mana, 5/5, King Toggwaggle, or Togwaggle. Battlecry, swap decks with your opponent. Give them a ransom spell to swap back. King's Ransom, swap decks with your opponent. 5 mana. So they are able to swap back instantly. By the time you're at 8 mana, chances are they are able to play King's Ransom, which means you probably only get one. Yeah, you'll probably only get 1 turn out of this. And the only way that won't be the case is if your opponent decides to have some fun with you and they decide they like your deck more. But if you're choosing to swap decks, you probably like their deck more. So this is not a good card. But it is a very fun card, and I would love to have it in my decks. I would love to play this in every deck. For the stats and for the mana and for what it does, it's an awful, awful card. And now to some Druid cards. 8 mana, Grizzled Guardian, 3/5 stats, terrible stats, Taunt, Death-Rattle, recruit 4 minions that cost 4 or less. So, a 3/5 stats in the basic card set is worth 4 mana. If you summon 2 more minions that cost 4 or less, if they all cost 4, that's a 12 mana card. But it says or less, which means you could potentially summon 1 mana minions or 0 mana minions, in which case this card is not worth it. This is a very high risk card to play, because if you really need to survive on 8 mana, if you are top decking this, or if it's your only 8 mana card, you try and get a big minion out there, this is one of the worst cards you could play, just because you don't know if it's going to help you at all. But if you happen to get lucky, then you make 4 mana on this, and you end up with 3 minions that your opponent has to deal with. So there are also certainly better 8 mana cards. Like, I don't see why I would play this as opposed to just an Ironbark Protector, which is harder to kill, is likely to end up doing more damage, and is just all around more useful than recruiting minions that cost 4 or less. Or Lich King, you know? The one saving grace of the card is that it's a recruit, so you don't just summon 2 random minions entirely. You can choose what minions you have a pool to summon from by properly designing your deck around it. But since this is a Druid card, there aren't very many good Druid cards that cost 4 or less. And with that being the case, you playing this on 8 mana is likely to result in you losing the game. So have fun with that. 4 mana, Branching Pass, choose twice, draw a card, give your minions +1 attack, gain 6 armor. So you can choose from these 3 spells, and you choose it twice. So gaining 6 armor is worth around 1 mana, closing in on 2 mana. give your minions +1 attack. It can be worth 1 mana or 2 mana. And draw a card is worth 2 mana. So if you choose twice, you'll very likely get around 4 mana of stats, possibly only 3 mana of stats for a 4 mana card. But because you get it in a single card, that means that it allows you to have other things in your deck that you wouldn't be allowed to have. Like, for example, if you wanted to not run 2 1 mana give your minions +1 attack, you could just run one of these and choose that twice, but you lose the early game tempo because instead of playing 1 mana cards, you're playing a single 4 mana card. There is that trade-off. It's certainly a playable card. I would expect at least one in basically every single Druid deck because the options it gives you are amazing. But I don't think it's any level of overpowered just because its mana cost makes it so that these stats aren't going to help you that much if you happen to be behind. This is a good way to cement your lead. It's not a good way to come back in the game. Even with a draw card, if you draw 2 cards off this, it's still not that good because other people have 3 mana draw 2 cards. So it's an okay card. And now for some Hunter class cards. Seeping Oozling. Battlecry, gain the Death-Rattle of a random minion in your deck. I think this is one of the only oozes that does not destroy a weapon, so 5/4 stats. And there's already a lot of good Hunter decks out there. Hunter Death-Rattle decks, I should say. The biggest drawback to this card is that it does not combo with Corpse Widow. Your Death-Rattle cards cost 2 less. Since this card is a Battlecry, what that means is that this will cost 6 mana no matter what. Corpse Widow can be used to drop other 6 mana mains like Scavenging Highmane to 4 mana. It will not affect Seeping Oozling. With that being the case, I would not run more than one of these just because it doesn't fully combo with the rest of your Death-Rattles, but it is very much playable in a Death-Rattle Hunter deck. I would expect to see at least one of them in every Death-Rattle deck. However, I would recommend against running 2 of them just because chances are that you're going to get a bad outcome out of this instance. And it's not going to be worth the amount of mana you spent on it. As for the Hunter Legendary, Katharina Windsorwisp, Battlecry, and Death-Rattle, recruit a beast. Again, these are cards that already exist in your deck. As to what beast you would want to recruit, you can have a King Crush, things of that nature. If you really want, you could make this give you 100% King Crush and just have no other beast in your deck. If you really wanted to, you could make this give you 100% King Crush by having no other beasts in your deck. You can run an entirely different type of hunter deck, like for example a Secret Hunter or a Control Hunter, which they seem to be pushing. If you happen to be able to figure out how to use Crushing Walls to help you create a Control Hunter deck, you can use this to have the end game pushing power, where you get a 6/6 on the board and 2 8/8s with charge. And you still have the King Crush that you can draw naturally and get that out on the board as well. So I would expect this to show up in 1-turn kill decks. But beyond that, it's not a spectacular card. It's not an awful card. It's very much playable. And if I get it, I'll certainly play it in my decks. But I don't see it as being overpowered, which is good. That's good card design. Mage class cards. 1 mana, 1/2, Arcane Artificer. Whenever you cast a spell, gain armor equal to its cost. The first thing to note about this card is that you don't want to play it on turn 1. This is very easily killed on turn 1. You probably want to play this on turns 5 or 6. If you can keep it alive, then you can really start gaining a lot of armor. Even if you play a 5 mana card or a 5 mana spell, you only gain 5 armor, which is worth 1 mana. That would make this 2 mana card if you happen to do that. If you happen to keep it alive longer than that, then you can get a lot more value out of it. It's not a very good card, honestly. Mages don't really survive based on armor. They do run ice blocks and things of that nature, but they mostly survive, ice barrier. They mostly survive off of ice block and lifesteal. With that being the case, this is not very good unless you play it super late game and you can just spam spells afterwards. I would never play this on turn 1 unless you expect to be up against a rushy deck, in which case, good luck. 2 mana, 2/2 Rayvin Familiar. It's a beast. Battlecry. Reveal a spell in each deck. If yours costs more, draw it. I'm not sure why they took the time to make this a beast because mages can't. They don't have combos for beast. So it doesn't matter that it's a beast. It doesn't help the mage at all. I don't understand that. Basically what this card does is it gives you the random chance to have a more powerful Novice Engineer. So Novice Engineer is a 2 mana 1/1. You draw a card. You don't guarantee what type of card it is. So this is a 2 mana 1/1. You draw just any card in your deck. This is a 2 mana 2/2. You guarantee you draw a spell in your deck if it costs more than your opponent. So if it didn't have that chance of not drawing a card, this would be absolutely amazing. It would be a prime example of power creep. But because you have the chance of not drawing a card at all, that balances it out a little bit. However, if you know you're playing against something like a Miracle Rogue, then you know this is a safe card to play. You can just play it on curve, and you're guaranteed to draw a card. Otherwise, you have to wait for your opponent to play high mana cards or to draw high mana cards before you really draw yours. So this is a good card to get late game. It's a good card to get early game. It's a good card to get mid game just because you can draw a card off of it. I don't think it's any level of broke. However, I would expect it to just replace Novice Engineers because why play Novice Engineer? We can play this. Lesser Ruby Spellstone, 2 mana. Add a random mage spell to your hand. Play 2 elementals to upgrade. So that's probably one of the reasons why they added the elemental earlier than 1 mana. It makes it easier to upgrade, and they don't have to be played in the same turn. You can just play them at any point in time. So the Ruby Spellstone upgrade then goes to add 2 random mage spells to your hand, and you play 2 more elementals, and then you add 3 random mage spells to your hand. So this costs 6 mana. It gets you a total of 7 mage spells at the end of it. This costs you 2 mana. You get 3 random mage spells to your hand, and you get 4 elementals out on the board. However, it says play, not summon, which means that if you summon the water elemental as a byproduct of playing the hero card, I don't think it would activate. I've never seen them use the word play. They always use the word summon, which means that you very likely have to actually play it from your hand. You can't just have random summon effects trigger this. In any case, even if you only summon 2 elementals, this is already a great card because you get 2 spells for 2 mana. And that's really good. If you really want, you can think of this as a better Arcane Intellect. Arcane Intellect, you play 3 mana, you draw 2 cards. This card, you play 2 mana, you draw 2 spells, but they're random spells. So there's that drawback. Next, 3 mana Explosive Runes Secret. After your opponent plays a minion, deal 6 damage to it and any excess to their hero. Oh boy. That's a really good card. One of the problems with something like the Hunter spell Snipe is that you're likely to either waste damage or you're likely to not do enough damage to kill your opponent's thing. This will almost definitely kill your opponent's guy because not many minions have more than 6 health. And if you happen to overkill it, you hurt the enemy hero, which means it's good on any hero or it's good on any minion your opponent might play. Either it gets it very close to death or it just does a lot of damage to the face to your opponent. I really like this card. I like this card so much. I would play at least one of them in every single mage deck if I had them.